So you're beautifully aligning with left. You say, I know this is tough. So left, protective mode, can you go over there? And now let's allow the right to be fully flowing, you know, linking the differentiated parts. And then we're going to get to vertical integration right now. So that would be an invitation for bilateral integration. Then the vertical integration, the third domain of integration, is you're going, let's focus on that feeling down there. Now, the way of feeling literally in the gut makes its way up to the cortical consciousness is through layer 1 of the spinal cord, and then up through, also through the vagus nerve, the 10th cranial nerve, and then they make their way up through the insula, and it links with von Economo neurons over to the right anterior cingulate, and these are where you get a representation of self. So there's all sorts of things we talk about that, but just leave it at that, so that even when you say there's a part of you that's an 8-year-old boy that has this pain, I'll bet you if someone does a study, and as far as I know, no one's done the study, you're going to see that there's going to be a von Economo neuron activation with the anterior cingulate and the anterior insula that has a 8-year-old boy texture to it, you know, in terms of the firing patterns. And in that moment, he goes, yeah, there's this pain. And the left hemisphere says, I want to shove it down. And you beautifully say, hey, I think we can help. And then he goes there, but it's really, really painful. And I don't want to do it. And then you beautifully ask, well, but you know, if we did do it, if we went to that painful place, there's a positive outcome that can happen. We're not going to just sit in the pain, right? So now you're getting to some narrative stuff we'll get to in a moment, but that's the vertical integration piece. You're starting, literally letting him just feel his body without doing anything about it. That's vertical integration. Then the fourth layer of integration that you tapped into, you didn't know you were doing all this stuff.
I didn't have no idea.
So then the fourth layer you're getting to is called memory integration. And this is where, you know, you have two layers of memory. One is implicit memory, one's explicit memory. And implicit memory has bodily sensations, emotions, procedural memory, that is behavioral memory, and also perceptual memory. And what can happen also is you can generalize and make mental models, like, you know, all Jews are bad, all Arabs are bad, or whatever. You make a mental model and you can get priming. So whenever you see a Jew or an Arab, you have a certain reactivity. So priming, mental models, perceptual memory, bodily sense memory, emotional memory, and behavioral memory, those are all part of implicit memory. They get laid down in the brain, and unless the hippocampus gets involved in the limbic area and integrates those, they remain in a free-floating way. Now, the free-floating can have a couple of layers. It can be completely segregated in massive trauma, so they're dissociated, or they can remain as a little 8-year-old boy. That feels like he's an 8-year-old boy.
Right.
So implicit memory, when it's retrieved, has no feeling of being in the past.
Exactly.
It doesn't, you don't feel like, and so for me, that's an explanation of flashbacks or parts that feel like they're still stuck as an 8-year-old. So then with the hippocampus, what I thought you were doing there was using focal attention, which is attention entering consciousness. By being with him, he could widen what I call a window of tolerance, so he could stay with the pain of his gut because of you and this real space you were creating, so that he could then use his hippocampus to create the two layers of explicit memory. One is especially dominant in the right hemisphere is autobiographical memory, and Daniel Schachter here across the river studies that and has shown it's right dominant. And factual memory, another form of explicit memory, is on the left dominant. And when I watched his eyes when you began that process, when he says, I'm in the village, I'm 8, and it was 1978, and you know, all this mayhem was happening, his eyes looked to the left. Now, it's true you were kind of sitting leftish, but I was watching other times he looked straight. When your eyes move to the left, it's activating your right hemisphere. And interestingly, your right hemisphere is dominant for autobiographical memory. So he's now collecting these layers of implicit processing into autobiographical memory. And Endel Tolving has this great thing called the HERA model. It's called the hemispheric encoding retrieval asymmetry model, which it doesn't matter the details of it, but the bottom line is you need to activate both left, right, left, right, left, right to make things go from implicit to explicit processing. So that's what I thought was going on. That one was a form of memory integration, and it was so painful, and he could then start making these implicit memories of what a terrifying experience that was, explicit. Then what happened is it moved to the fifth domain of integration, narrative integration. And this is where you make sense out of things that don't make sense. You make sense of the madness. So while memory integration brings implicit to explicit forms, and explicit memory, when it's retrieved, feels like I'm remembering something from the past, or it's a fact. So I know it's something I'm remembering. So that's good. Narrative integration takes it to the next step. It says, what's the meaning of what happened? What's the story of what happened? And you were able to kind of go through the story of what was happening, was there. And then, as research has shown from Lenore Terr and others, you change the ending.
Right.
So studies on neuroplasticity show imagination is as powerful as an external experience. Like say you're a basketball player, I know you like basketball, and you've hurt your leg. If you spend the month when you're off the court imagining shooting, you do about as well as if you were shooting all that month. Yeah. So imagination is a powerful neuroplastician, right? And so what you were doing there when you give and this is what Lenore Terr was showing, not with the brain, but just in general with memory resolution for trauma, you say, look, that 8-year-old had nowhere to go. We're going to give him somewhere to go. Imagine you can take him up because I'm taking him up on the mountain. Well, the 8-year-old can't take himself, so it's another mode of that person, another part of that person that takes it. Fine.
Self.
And the self, yeah, great. So it's this larger plane of possibility that says, I'm going to take this plateau and set of peaks, and I'm going to move it up the mountain, which is beautiful. So that's kind of a narrative integration thing. I'm making the story be different, which is beautiful because we're kind of living in a dream anyway. There's really not that much a difference between being awake and being in a dream. So, and that's the power of therapy, really.
Right.
So that's the narrative integration piece. And then the state integration, the sixth domain of integration, is I think what IFS is all about. So we don't have to spend that much time on it. But you're saying, look, there's kind of these perhaps left dominant protective parts, perhaps vulnerable, needy, right dominant parts. And these are all different aspects of us forever, different modes, different parts. And there's, in state integration, there's integration within a state, which is what you're doing beautifully for this 8-year-old state of vulnerability. Then there's integration across states, and that you did beautifully by saying, look, you can have a strong party that would protect not just you, but your kids, your family, your whole, the Arab Israelis. That's great. Don't get rid of that, for God's sake. But you can be open up and be receptive from that place that before was a reactive protective state.
Right.
You can have a protective receptive state. So then he takes them up the mountains, and then, when he said, and I couldn't hear it and you translated it, when he said, there's room enough for the whole world.
Right.
Was that the most gorgeous thing you've ever heard in your life? Wow. So, that goes not only from state integration, it goes to the seventh domain of integration, which is called interpersonal integration. So you're allowing him to realize, yes, you've had this internal world, but the mind is not just embodied, which this is a good example of the pain in his belly. And then the final one is just called identity integration. And that would be further work, but there it's like, I can have an identity, I guess if we put an IFS spin on it, I can have an identity as just one person all alone. Well, then you open that up and say, no, you're not just one person, you're many parts, and even a larger plane of possibility self. You go, oh, wow. So that would be a form of identity integration.
Right.
But then you even widen it up, and there was a hint of it here, where you say, and I don't know how you feel about the wording, I don't know what words we should use, but, so, because I know you have the capital S self, I don't know, that the self isn't even just a singular noun, it's a plural verb.
I totally believe that.
Okay, good. So I use the word we, MWE, as we did yesterday in the practice. So then Jamal will realize my self is related to my...
Same as Noah's self, right.
Exactly, and they hug, and then you get a feeling like, wow, identity integration could really be opened up.
Right.
So, it's beautiful work.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.